Hello people of the internet, welcome to another episode of Kaiju's Corner, the show that I use to talk about whatever is on the top of my head or is brought to me by my good old co-host Deadpoolzilla. Say hello to the audience, Deadpoolzilla.
Hello everyone, I hope everyone is having a Merry Christmas or lack thereof. I hope you all are having happy holidays.
Indeed, for today, this is a festive time of the year, unless you are an individual who happens to be the Grinchiest of Grinches. I did want to make a quick little announcement here, in that I kind of mentioned this on the latest episode of SOS on Zazabar's channel, that I've been working on a series of videos, of actually Gundam-related videos, for what was originally supposed to be Gundam Month. However, due to the delayed production of the series, it looks like my planned Gundam month isn't going to be exclusive to December. Rather, it's going to be leak into January. So I guess Gundam month will cross over between December and January. And
So
I
just
guess,
call it Gundam month and a half.
but then it wouldn't sound as good. You know, it's all about marketing. It's all about making your shit sound the nicest. But I do appreciate the suggestion. Although it's funny that when I first started, this actually came from an idea that I had from the early last year. No, actually like late 2015, early 2016, where I actually did make two Gundam-related videos. One at the very tail end of December, and one at the beginning of January. So I guess history repeats itself. Like George Lucas says, it's like poetry, it rhymes. But, so, Deadpoolzilla, wait, with that out of the way, what are we actually going to be talking about, Deadpoolzilla?
Today we're going to be talking about, since this is Kaiju Corner, I figured let's talk about the qualifications of what makes a Kaiju, because when you think about, it's just Godzilla and anything a giant monster, but by that train of logic, that would Clifford count as a Kaiju?
Not really, because he's not a monster, he's just an animal. He's just a big animal.
Well, so is Kong, and he's a big animal.
But he acts like a monster. You see,
this shit will keep you up at night when you think about it, like, well, Kong's but he was scared when he was in the city and he was just protecting his turf. And this one time when I was trying to think, does Clifford count as a kaiju? Like, that kept me up for like 15 minutes at night one time.
I see. I assume because of what you just said, I'm assuming that a lot of things tend to keep you up at night. The smallest of details.
Yeah.
It's funny that you brought up this very broad topic, because interestingly enough, I noticed that in the past, whenever people on social media, especially Facebook, tend to question the qualifications of what is or isn't a quote-unquote kaiju, usually you would get some Japanese purists that come out of the woodworks and say, oh, you can't discuss what a Japanese word is. That's up for the Japanese to determine what it means or does not mean. And I think to myself, we've already kind of done that with the terms anime and manga, because anime and manga, they are Japanese terms that generally mean animation and comics. Like, for me living in Japan, and whenever I never bring up the word anime to my Japanese students, because to them, anything that is animated is anime. Anything that is a comic is manga. So when my students talk to me and they talk to me about Japanese animation or Japanese manga or Japanese comics, they never refer to it as anime or manga. They refer to it as animation and comics. So to them, they do not categorize their own shit as like being separate from the rest of the world's animations and comics. And meanwhile in America, we do just that. We specifically take their Japanese terms and say, oh, anything from Japan, that is its own thing. Anything from that is its own category right there. At every bookstore, at every DVD store, DVD shop, at every Walmart, at every Barnes and Nobles, there's always a section that exclusively has animation or comics from Japan. And I feel like we've sort of done that already kind of done that to an extent with the term kaiju, where for us, kaiju, we associate that word with Japanese monsters or Japanese style monsters, uh, as opposed to just the Japanese, which use that word very broadly as well, just to say anything that is a monster is kaiju, because that is essentially what the word means.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's a very open-ended thing because when you think about what are the major qualifications for a monster of any type to be classified as a kaiju?
Hmm. Yeah, and when I think of a monster, I generally think of an aggressive creature that causes harm to human beings and as well as its surrounding environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So Andreas, what would your what other qualifications would you give a kaiju?
Hmm. I guess for a kaiju, that's a funny thing because in recent years, I've stopped using that word a lot. Maybe it's sort of a hipster effect where it's like ever since Pacific Rim and Godzilla 2014, everyone started using the word kaiju. Or then again, it could also be a thing where it's like, I know kaiju is sort of becoming a popular term, but it's not. I know it's not. So it's nowhere near as recognizable of a term as anime. So for me, I try to downplay my use of the word kaiju and just refer to all monsters as, well, monsters for the sake of simplicity, and for my YouTube audiences who may or may not be familiar with that term, with kaiju term. But for me, when I hear the word kaiju, I generally think, yeah, it kind of has like the same thing from the same thing for that. I think of the same thing as how most people think of when they think of anime and manga. It's like if it's from Japan, I would think of it as a kaiju. Not even it's so. It's like even if it's. I know there's the argument like many people try to think of Western monsters like Gorgo and King Kong. Or the Beast from
Gorg
20,000 Fathoms as kaiju. But for me, it's like, I would say they're kaiju inspired, but not really. And I do want to make this clear right off the bat. It's like, for us, giving our own interpretations of the term kaiju, we're not saying this is the be-all, end-all of what kaiju is for everybody. We're just saying that this is our own interpretations, what we generally think of when we hear that term, or what we like to associate with that term.
Exactly. I would say that, for me, I would count, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was the big inspiration for Godzilla,
Uh-huh.
as I would count it as a kaiju.
Uh-huh.
I would count, Kong and even the monster from Cloverfield as a kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
I would even it's kind of it's certain height, a certain size for me. I know it
Mm-hmm.
sounds weird, but it's a certain size for me for what qualifies as a kaiju.
Mm-hmm. In that case, would you think of a Japanese inspired Western animation as anime, like The Last
Oh,
Airbender or Voltron
some
Legendary Defender?
You see, therein lies the. I think, like you said, I'm kind of the mind that it's kaiju has become kind of an Americanized as well as it's kind of an international name now. With anime, it's kind of like, well, it's still anime if it's from Japan. I don't know. It's weird, I know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So you're saying that
but
the term kaiju has become, in a way, more loosely used in Western culture than it has been for the term anime.
yeah.
Hmm. Okay. And you mentioned before about the size thing. What size do you generally think of when you think kaiju, and why do you refer to kaiju as giant monsters when we already have another term for giant monsters, Daikaiku? Dai meaning great or big.
Kaiju is just easier to say. Daikaiju. I can go say Daikaiju if I want. It's just that Kaiju's shorter. I'm that lazy.
Okay, okay. And funny enough, it's like while anime and manga are terms that are still very widely used in Japan from my experiences, almost nobody here uses the term kaiju, similar to how nobody uses the term tokusatsu, mostly because while it's okay in some social circles for adults to be into anime and manga, as long as they keep that hobby very to themselves, keep that hobby very private in their lives, um, pretty much like the popularity of tokusatsu and manga, I mean tokusatsu and kaiju are generally reserved for very young children who watch Kamen Rider or Super Sentai. So it's like I almost
Uh,
never hear that term because adults aren't into that sort of stuff here.
yeah. Um, like I said, for the size, it has to be around 100, 70 to 100 feet for me to be recognized as a kaiju for me.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, and there has to be other qualifications. Like it can't, like if it's a monster that is generally not, it's not generally that size. Like I'm not going to call a blue whale or a whale shark a kaiju. It has to be like an animal that should not exist on Earth.
Okay, and what about some of the monsters in the Godzilla series, which are generally bigger versions of normal animals, like Ebirah, and Kumonga, and Kamakuras?
It's always kind of like retcon some places where it's like, oh, they're that certain size because of radiation or something to that degree,
Hmm.
or they're born that way. But it's it's kind of an animal. It has to be like an animal that shouldn't be that size
Hmm.
today. Like it should not be that big
Hmm.
in this decade because yeah, there were there's always that possibility that animals could have reached a massive size in like
Hmm.
the Precambrian era or something to that
The
degree. I mean,
Mesozoic
hell, you
era.
look at yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Like
and uh-huh.
Gorosaurus. Gorosaurus should not be that big. Even by prehistoric standards, he should not have been
Hmm.
that big.
Or did you ever saw that movie, The Last Dinosaur?
Think so.
Where essentially it's like it's a bunch of dinosaurs that are all Gorosaurus size.
Oh, wait, didn't Toho help make that movie?
I'm thinking it's Toei. I can do a quick little search on that one. Anyways, please continue.
Yeah, so like animals like Gorosaurus and even Kumanga, even they shouldn't have been that big for their respective eras. So
Hmm.
I would, those are kind of it. Like, again, it kind of leads in that question of Kong shouldn't be that big.
Hmm.
So,
There's still
he kind of
that
counts.
fantastical aspect to it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just checked. The Last Dinosaur was a co-production by Rankin Bass and Tsuburaya Productions, and was distributed by Toho.
Rankin Bass did that movie? The people who do the stop motion movie? What?
Rankin Bass did a lot of stuff. They did the King Kong cartoon, if you remembered. In fact, I think Rankin Bass, maybe they also worked with Toho for King Kong Escapes. I'm gonna check that as well. But yeah, Rankin Bass did a lot of stuff outside the stop motion stuff. They had to do something to keep themselves afloat on the other 365 days of the year.
Yeah. With I'm just now kind of imagining Kong going, I'm Mr. Kong Miser.
Put one foot in front of the other, and then you will be stomping out the door.
Oh,
And
that needs
yes,
to be a thing now.
uh, King Kong Escapes was another co-production by Toho and Rankin Bass, with distribution by Toho in Japan, Universal Studios in America. So there you go. Rankin Bass worked on tokusatsu projects.
Oh, Rankin Bass, is there nothing you can't do and make it creepy?
Looking at drunken-looking Kong in King Kong Escapes, I doubt it. But anyways, I guess for me, yeah, I guess most people, when they hear the term kaiju, they automatically think Godzilla. When they think Godzilla, they think of, big monsters stomping about models. It's like a very classic image that's been burned into the pop culture mindset. And so, yeah, I can see that why they would generally think of Japanese monsters as being much big, of being of great size. And why do you think, Deadpoolzilla, that Japanese monsters tend to be bigger in scale than American-sized monsters?
That's a question I've always asked myself. If we don't, outside of Cloverfield and the kaijus from Pacific Rim, we're just now getting giant monsters that have
I
been
guess
bigger.
you could say Ray Harryhausen made big monsters like
Yeah,
uh mhm.
outside of the giant octopus and maybe a few other smaller monsters here and like a few other monsters here and there, but he never normally went over the size of like the dragon from Seven Voyages of Sinbad or
The Beast from
um
20,000 Fathom.
yeah, the giant octopus and the Colossus from Jason and the Argonauts were probably the biggest one, the largest monsters he created, and the Kraken from Clash of the
Yeah,
Titans.
yeah, that's the perfect
But
one.
yeah, but those are the only ones that were what I would consider kaiju size. The other one, well, Rhodosaurus as well, the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but
Hmm.
that was like the bare minimum of for me for kaiju size.
Hmm. Hmm. So it's like I guess they're generally around King Kong size as opposed to Godzilla sized.
Yeah,
Okay, and why
like
do you think
like
that
it,
is the go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say that for me and the monsters there, it's like it is a interesting line because I don't consider the ants from them kaiju. I don't
Hmm.
consider I guess you could say the giant claw could be kaiju.
It is big, rather big monster in scale.
It is like Rodan size, but that's the thing.
What
Like,
about what about the 50-foot woman? She's big.
mm, yeah,
She's only 10 feet away from being Godzilla Showa size.
yeah. I don't know. Would you consider 50-foot woman kaiju or not?
No, because I think she's well. This is coming from someone who hasn't seen who has yet to see the movie, but just by looking at her appearance alone, I figure she's just a person, not someone that's very. That's she's. I don't think. I think. Well, I think Frankenstein. Frankenstein, Japanese Frankenstein. He certainly has a very um, animalistic mindset, as opposed to the 50-foot woman who is just a person who is big. And sometimes, and I guess over the course of the film, lets her emotions get the best of her. But I can see like looking at comparing Japanese Frankenstein to 50-foot woman. They're both similar like basic premises where they're just giant people. But Japanese Frankenstein has a lot more going on, like sci-fi wise, and again having that monstrous. It's always about like the personality. I think that comes right down to it. Does it act like a monster? And for Frankenstein, I would say it definitely does, since he has a very like King Kong type of mindset where he's animalistic, but he does have a bit of sympathy for the people around him.
Yeah. Okay. Here's something interesting. How about we go through like a yay or nay? I'm going to give a list of monsters, and you're going to give me a yay or nay for do they count as kaiju?
Okay, and again, just to reiterate, this is just our personal opinions, ladies and gentlemen. This is not meant to be a be-all, end-all judgment.
Okay, Cloverfield monster.
He's definitely kaiju inspired, I would say. Um, he does act like a giant monster, a Japanese style like he's very inspired by Japanese monsters, but to call him kaiju, I'm not sure. Again, it comes right down to it. I'm very hesitant about calling Western monsters kaiju because,
Well, for the sake of argument,
uh-huh. I guess if you were to put him in a Japanese film, I would say yes, this feels like 100% kaiju. So I guess so. Yeah, sure.
all right. Zilla.
Definitely, only through by association. He is officially a Godzilla monster. He is officially within the Godzilla franchise. So yeah, definitely.
All right. Let's see. What's another one? The tarantula from the giant tarantula.
Not really, because again, it's not. It's a giant. It's a giant. It's definitely a giant monster. I'll adhere to that, but I feel like it feels more like American monster, not Japanese monster, especially when it came to how they portrayed the creature through superimposed special effects. So yeah, I would say he does
Okay.
not feel like a giant, like a Japanese style monster.
Hmm. I would. Okay. Here. Okay. Reptilicus.
Ooh. Now that one, that's definitely trying to, it attempts to copy the style of Godzilla, but it never truly felt like it, in my opinion. I feel like it's a hilarious failure of trying to copy a style and failing at every turn. So, and again, also in terms of the plotting, it feels more like an American style monster movie than it does the Japanese style. So I would have to say no.
I'm gonna say yes on Reptilicus. Honestly, it has all the qualifications for me for being a kaiju. It's a giant monster, shouldn't be there.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a unique species. So yeah, I would say Reptilicus kaiju.
Okay.
In this video, fun. In this video, fun. I make your brain hurt over giant imaginary monsters.
Thinking too hard about things that shouldn't be thought too hard about in the first place.
Exactly. It's what. God, what have we become? um.
We should be ashamed
All
of
right.
ourselves.
Okay. Gorgo.
Gorgo. Let's see. So yeah, that one definitely feels about as close to the Japanese style as you can possibly get. I mean, the design is very Godzilla-esque. The model work is very Tsuburaya, very reminiscent of Eiji Tsuburaya's work. Um, the plotting itself feels very a Western. It feels like a combination of like King Kong and the Lost World. So it's like, almost like a really nice blend of Western and Japanese styles mix. And I can definitely say that it is very much so a kaiju-inspired monster movie, very much like Cloverfield. So I'll give it that. I'll give it that. I'd be willing to give the title of a kaiju.
Okay. That is a yay for Gorgo. Hmm. I already said giant claw, and we kind of came to consensus that yeah, we could go for that. Could be considered kaiju.
Yeah, it is technically puppetry, which is what Rodin went through. I would say
It,
it's in a way. What do you think is succeeded better at copying the Tokusatsu style, the giant claw or Reptilicus?
that's like asking, trying to compare horse shit to dog shit, and which is
Yeah,
better.
which is better? Yeah, yeah. Which failed the least?
Yeah, which can you stomach to sit through to the credits is what the big question is. All right.
I'll probably have to give it to the giant claw.
Really?
Because it's still a good movie, like not counting the monster itself, while the Reptilicus, like there a good portion of the movie is just advertisement for tourism.
All right, I give you that. All right, giant mantis.
Giant mantis. Oh, the deadly mantis, you mean?
The deadly mantis.
Let's see. I'm gonna have to say no because again, it doesn't have that same giant like tokusatsu feel. It doesn't have that style. It just feels again like more of a 50s monster movie. In fact, doesn't it essentially copy the plot to The Beast from 20,000 Fathom with the whole frozen monster from the Arctic?
It kind of does now that I think about it.
And it's got that. It's what? Let's see. I'm actually kind of I'm almost getting it confused with the Burt I. Gordon superimposed big animal movies, like Beginning of the End with the giant grasshoppers. Because I know the Deadly Mantis, it was like half of it was portrayed by a real mantis, and the other half, and the other half of its screen time, it was usually like a big life scale model. But I'm gonna have to say no on that one.
All right. It's another giant monster I could pull out and okay. I had one and I lost it. You throw out a few. Well, actually, let me pose this question. It's like a spin-off of what the topic we're doing here for this video.
Okay.
Do you count like monsters for like Mechagodzilla and Jet Jaguar and all the other like robotic kaiju we see as kaiju or mechas?
Definitely mechas. I always considered them, me being a huge fan of mechas, I'd always considered them as sort of their own category. Something like Mechagodzilla is a very unique entry because something like Mechagodzilla is like a combination of a giant monster and a giant robot, where it's got the personality of a giant robot, but also it's got the ferocity and the more animalistic appearance of a giant monster. And at which point I would often like to bring up a secondary term because I know like for smaller monsters like the Power Ranger monsters, the Kamen Rider monsters, the alien, even like some of the humanoid monsters from Ultraman, there's actually a secondary term that kaiju fans almost never use, and that is kaijin, which is Kaijin. Kaijin means like jin means is the Japanese word for person or humanoid type thing. So kaijin means strange person, as much like how kaiju is strange beast. And kaijin is usually like the humanoid monsters with very humanistic personalities. And
So,
so I,
so, so, so by that thought,
mhm.
that train of logic, would you consider like like the Universal Studios monsters like Kaijin? Would they fall under that category?
Yeah, they can definitely fall under kaijin. Definitely much more subdued kaijin in terms of designs, but definitely kaijin all the same. Which is very funny because, again, kaiju is a very broad term in Japan, which can include the universal monsters. I guess kaijin could be something like not so much Frankenstein or the Wolfman. Maybe Dracula would be considered a kaijin because he has a very humanistic personality and as opposed to acting like a straight up raging animal. Then again, some cases of Frankenstein, he can be just as intelligent, such as in Bride of Frankenstein. So it's a big case by case basis. So it really depends on the level of intelligence and self-awareness that these characters would have. Like if you looked at any monster from Power Rangers, they're all really pretty much like self-aware and have that same human level intelligence, if not higher. Let's see. Where were we again? Oh yeah, it would be
Uh,
Mechagodzilla. So the term for I wanted to propose is Kikaiju. Ki being machine, kaiju being obviously monster. Kikaiju was a term I first heard in Mazinger Z. In Mazinger Z, in the original manga and anime, Mazinger Z faced off against an entire army of robot monsters, and in America, in the any sort of official subtitles, the Kikaiju are always referred to as mechanical beasts. So I would like to think
so
of Mechagodzilla as being a Kikaiju rather than a Kaiju.
all right. So by that thought, where would Mecha King Ghidorah fall under? Kikaiju or Kaiju?
Definitely Kaiju because he's more. Think that he is more beast than machine
Even though
because
he was being piloted, and
that
that
is a
falls
very
under.
good. That's a very good
And
question.
and technically,
Hmm.
Kiryu had sentience as well, but he was piloted as well.
That is another good question. It's like the basis of Mecha King Ghidorah is still organic. So it's like he does have a robotic shell, but underneath that robotic shell is probably a series of organs that form like the base of that body. You can tell by, you see the tails, you see the legs, you see the neck. So while the wings and torso appear to be fully mechanical, I would like to assume that there's at least an organic basis to all of that, making him, I think, in my opinion, more organic than mechanical. And even though he is piloted, I still think that it's possible to still think of him as organic because there have been many cases where you would see a human have some sort of control over an animal by means of science fiction style writing. Um,
Okay, what about Kiryu? Where does he fall?
Kiryu.
Because
Uh,
Kiryu is sentient, but he is being piloted,
that's again very good question. For
and
Kiryu,
he is all machine instead of the interior.
right. So the interior, he still has the skeleton. He still has like a somewhat of an organic compound that forms the basis, the structural building blocks to his appearance. But like you said, he is more mechanical than organic. He's like, unlike Mecha King Ghidorah, who's more organic than mechanical, Kiryu is definitely more mechanical than organic. So he kind of flips more onto the mecha side, but he still has that cyborg component to him, very similar to the Evangelions, where they do have, although Evangelions they're more organic underneath. Um, yeah, it's very interesting when you bring up cyborgs into the question, and when you bring up cyborgs to the argument of whether or not they belong to one group or the other. Uh, in a way, we can just easily say, oh, they're cyborgs. They belong in their own category. But just because it's fun thinking about this stuff, I would say maybe Kiryu is more inclined. I tend to view him more on the side of mechas than I do with Mecha King Ghidorah, and especially when you bring in Godzilla Tokyo SOS, where he does have sentience, but it almost feels more like an artificial intelligence sentience than it does actual monster as monster style sentience. Like, like a HAL 9000, because it appears to be a lot smarter than any Godzilla would. Appears smarter, and it even goes out of its way to like communicate to his pilots. Like, if you remember that part where he says like "Sayonara, person who piloted me," before he plunged into the depths with Godzilla. So it's like that's not the mindset of a monster at all.
So, all right. All right. I guess those are kind of up in the air for debate.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you asked me a couple monsters I think do they or do they not count as kaiju?
All right. How about what was it called? The Cyclops, the one with the person with the shitty makeup that covers one eye.
Oh, the amazing colossal man.
Yeah.
That's a good one because it's a guy dosed in radiation. And he is a giant monster, and he is acting all primal. That's a tough one. Well, on the other hand, he is technically still human. Oh, this is a tough one. Gonna say no, because it is still just a human, and he's just a giant, really.
Oh, and I found the Cyclops, which is a completely different thing from 1957, which I'll send you an image right now. The Colossal Man and the Cyclops are two different characters.
I thought they were the same movie.
Oh no! Even though I wouldn't blame you, because both of them feature superimposed bald guys.
All right. What you got another one?
Let's see. Well, I guess the Cyclops. Because I guess the Colossal Man, he's missing an eye. Well, I guess the same thing, but his other eye is still normal. Meanwhile, the Colossal Man, his eye is melted away, but his other eye is like big and bugged out.
Gonna say no. I'm gonna say also no to the Cyclops.
Okay, let's see. Apparently there are three movies that feature superimposed bald men. So we have the amazing Colossal Man, who is just a big dude. The Cyclops, who has one melted eye and one big cartoony eye, and we have War of the Colossal Beast, who has an empty skeleton eye socket. So we have the Colossal Man, the Cyclops, and the Colossal Beast.
I think the Colossal Beast is a sequel to the Colossal Man.
Oh, okay, really? All right. They should really form like a 3-pack. If any of these movies are in the public domain, they should make like a 3-pack DVD of them.
One-eyed giant bald men.
Yes.
But then again, that would be someone's fetish, knowing the world.
That totally gets me horny for the night. So let's see. Another monster. Let's see. What to think. What about American monsters that are made into Japanese-style monsters like Frankenstein and legendary beast Wolfman from the Godzilla fan film?
Hmm. I would say Frankenstein because he does fit he does fit a lot of the qualifications, and he does give rise to the gargantuans, which are also I'd consider kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, here actually, let me think. Let me say one for you
Mm-hmm.
because I just thought of this. The angels, are they kaiju from Evangelion? Do you
Ooh,
consider them
very
kaiju?
good. Very good question. Some of them are very kaiju inspired, like Sachiel and I forgot its name, but it was the one angel that could split into two twins. Other kinds are very abstract shapes that do not fit the general style of a giant monster. But overall, knowing Hideaki Anno's background with Tokusatsu and his love for Japanese science fiction, I would say that they're at least Tokusatsu inspired on the same level as the Pacific Rim kaiju, Gorgo, and the Cloverfield monster. So the basic idea and premise came from kaijus, and they were able to take that and spin it off on its own. So in a way, I would say loosely, yeah. Some of them more so than others, but I would say overall, yes.
Okay. I would say yeah, but you did bring up a good point that some of them are just weird shapes, and they're not really fit under, like, would you call them giant monsters or just freaky shapes?
Yeah, they're just like somewhat semi-sentient shapes or like giant semi-sentient, semi-organic beings of death.
Yeah. And here's another interesting question I want to propose to you.
Hmm.
What would you consider like monsters from mythology, like the Chimera
Hmm.
or, the Kraken or some other monsters from not just Greek mythology, but, other mythologies in general?
I
Would
would
some of the
say,
monsters in
mhm.
mythologies count as kaiju? Would some of them count as kaiju, like, the Titans or anything else?
I guess it would have to depend on how they are portrayed, because when I think kaiju, I think some monsters that go out of their way to, wreak havoc upon human civilizations. Whereas some of the Greek myths, they don't really portray them as monsters, but rather as just big-ass animals that some asshole warrior like Perseus comes in to kick its ass. Um, they do have the makings of a kaiju, but again, it depends on how they're used um, in the stories that they're based in. Like the Sphinx, I don't really think of it as a kaiju because it just simply hangs out in its cave, waiting for stupid idiots to come in and fail at its riddles. Something like maybe the serpent from what was it? The story that Clash of the Titans was based off of, not the Kraken from the movie, but rather the big serpent. I would say it does feel a little bit more like a giant monster, like a kaiju monster. The
All right.
Hydra, probably a little more so as well. Again, if it's like a monster that goes in to attack Hercules like by going in near and messing up with like trying to attack humans.
All right. What about the two monsters from the Odyssey, Caribus and Scylla?
Charybdis and Scylla. Let's see.
Yeah, I can't. Apparently, I can't say
Probably,
names.
probably not because they don't act like monsters. They're people that were horribly disfigured by the gods and made into monsters. I would say, yeah, they're definitely monsters, but Japanese kaiju style monsters, not at all, because they just stand around in one spot and never move. They only attack anybody who unknowingly goes through their lair. So no, they don't really
Well, you
act
could say
like
the
they
same thing
don't.
about the.
Hmm.
You could say the same thing about the Hydra. It just stays in its swamp.
Yeah, true. So again, like I said, it depends on the story and how they're used. And I guess in the case of like say Jason the Argonauts, no. But if you were to say like maybe Disney's Hercules, I would say so, yeah.
So that one's up for debate, is what
Hmm.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Monsters and mythology,
Here's
that's
the thing.
debatable.
Dragons,
Oh, that's
are
tough.
they kaiju? Because in a
That's a
way, they're
tough
sort of
one.
like the most popular original giant monsters in human mythology.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of that one's kind of a slippery slope because you could I don't know if you could count them as kaiju because
They're sort of their own
um
thing, huh? You sort of
yeah,
think of them
yeah,
as being a category of their own.
yeah, but on the other hand, you've got some other dragons like, some of the monsters you see in like World of Warcraft or Lord of the Rings where they are so massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They
King
could they
Ghidorah's a
look like they could
dragon. And
yeah,
Manda.
it's Monda's technically a dragon, I guess.
Mm-hmm. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right.
You were what'd you say?
No, I didn't say anything. I just wonder. I was letting you think.
Um yeah. Um Yeah, that for me, like I said, for kaiju, it does fall into the size thing, but on the other hand, they are kind of their own thing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Kind of like again, like much like when you brought the Universal monsters, I think of them as sort of their own thing.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of weird because what I said about the gargantuas and all that. I don't consider giants as kaiju. They're
Hmm.
their own thing. They're
Yeah.
their own classification.
And again, it's sort of like how I view Japanese monsters. Again, like I told you, I'm very hesitant about calling Western monsters kaiju because when I think kaiju, I think of them as their own thing, similar to how I think of like the Universal monsters as their own thing, or dragons as their own thing, or big sci-fi Burt I. Gordon bug movies as their own thing.
Yeah.
So again,
So I think
I feel like they're very restricted to like those sort of things are kind of restricted to their own from the cultures that they came from. It's like you can't say are the gargantuans universal monsters? Well, not really because they came from a completely different thing entirely, only with a very loose connection to the universal monsters.
yeah.
Or so if I were to ask you, does Bolton feel like a Bolton from Ultraman? Does he feel like a universal monster?
Yeah. I think it comes down to as always, it's how you interpret it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's all I have to say on the matter is that there are certain monsters that I will consider kaiju, and other one even here in America, like there are American monsters I consider kaiju. And
Hmm.
now that we are basically building a kaiju universe here in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
filming industry, I
Hmm.
I would say that the kaiju genre is just going to get bigger in both sides, from east and west.
Hopefully, hopefully. I mean, as I think I've stated this before in some of my videos, that the kaiju subgenre of science fiction is very incredibly limited right now in Japan. Like outside of Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, and all that stuff that's generally aimed towards kids, we almost see none of that sort of stuff outside of Shin Gojira, which came out this year and was surprisingly a very massive hit for Toho. So whether or not we'll see more of this sort of stuff, or if we're just going to get our usual crossover henshin hero movies from here on out, it's kind of up for debate. I mean, after Godzilla's success, who knows? Maybe it'll spark another series of giant monster movies because we know giant monster media in Japan has been incredibly limited for the last, I want to say, decade and a half. We've had certain indie projects like what was it? It was like Gahara, Raiga, or the Monster X Strikes Back, or Zella Monster Martial Law. But they're all indie projects, and good. God bless those indie filmmakers that want to keep that genre alive through their own means and interpretations. But whether or not we'll see a continued growth on the big budget side of things after Shin Gojira, who's to say? Let's see. I think I thought I had one more monster that I wanted to bring up, but I feel like we've sort of made our point by the, we've already kind of said what we need to say by this point. We kind of given our, I think at this point the audience can sort of gauge how you and I think when we, in terms of how we, we personally classify our giant monsters in media.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that said, where can people find you, Deadpoolzilla?
On my channel or on Geekvolution.
Excellent. And what sort of video would you like to promote from your side?
Nothing really. Whatever comes to mind.
Alright. Well, I guess for my audience, you can check out my recent review for the 1966 tokusatsu film, The Magic Serpent. If you ever want to know where Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru from Naruto came from, look no further than this Showa adaptation, giant monster Showa adaptation of the classic Japanese folktale. Along with that, stay tuned for Gundam Month, where I talk about several topics pertaining to the Gundam franchise. My first video being a basic rundown on the history of Gundam. Hope you enjoy all of that, and as always, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
And I have been Deadpoolzilla.
And until next time, everybody, take care.